Hi, I'm Dr. Mitch Harlan, and welcome to the Truth Talks podcast. Today, I'm joined by an amazing guest, but before I introduce them to you, I want to ask that you please like and subscribe below. That way, we can continue to bring you these incredible stories. And if you're already liked and subscribed to our channel, we thank you for all of your support. Hi, I'm Dr. Mitch Harlan, and welcome to the Truth Talks podcast. Hey, was that a good enough radio voice?
I think it was very good.
Thank you. I've been practicing that since you're coming on here. My show today, Jimmy Lakey. How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
You know, I'm killing it. Jimmy Lakey, entrepreneur, humanitarian, radio and television host, former candidate for U.S. Congress.
Ran for Congress. That was before I had a little lobotomy that I got.
I
I went to therapy and I ended that political nonsense.
Producer, TV show Frontier Taste Tales. That's kind of funny. You actually did a great job there. That was
It's a
actually
fun
neat.
show.
It really looked cool.
Season 1, then COVID hit. We didn't get to season 2. We will, though.
It's going to happen. That's actually really entertaining. I really like it. So, man, I need to know this. Again, you had that. Can I say Rush? You just said it's like comparing you to Jesus or whatever.
You gotta be careful of that.
Man, it was good. It's that reminiscent of that voice. I like it. Voice, maybe not the style, but the voice, right?
Everybody thinks that's my radio voice. I just talk weird. I just talk that way.
From Texas.
Sometimes I enunciate, but that's, I guess, the big deal. I enunciate.
What got you into radio?
I have no clue. I had no clue. I was going to undergrad, going to be a lawyer. I'm going to be a lawyer.
Thank God you went into radio.
I wish I would. No, I don't know. I was going to be a lawyer, and I didn't want to go to law school, and so literally I was kind of starting another business, and a guy that owned a radio station said, "You have a nice voice," and I was like, "Sorry, I'm not." I thought it was one of those things, and it wasn't. And sure enough, I ended up on the radio, and within 6 weeks, I ended up walking into another. I was now fascinated with radio, so I walked into a station in Dallas. Back home, where I was thinking maybe I'll move to Nashville or get in the music industry and some other businesses I had started. And I was fascinated with radio, so I went to this radio station in Dallas and just to meet him and say, "Hey, what do you guys do?" I don't know, something had been stirred up about radio. And the guy said, "You have a really nice voice." Well, here we go again. And the next thing I know is for 2 weeks I was doing a morning show fill-in in Dallas, Texas. Didn't even know how to run a board, knew nothing about radio. But it was just I wouldn't say it's my good looks, but it's my voice. Radio.
Isn't that what they say? You got the face for radio?
I know it hurts my feelings when you say that.
I didn't say that. That's just the people that told me about this
People
story.
have talked about this to you. And
How do you pick your topics?
it's just when the mic opens, I go. No, I all day long you show prep to do a show. So I'm always on my computer. Anybody that's around me always seem to have a computer open or a phone or something, and I'm hitting print. And then once I get back to my home office, I will sit down at the end of the day, put them in good stacks, and that's kind of how we go. It's what's ever making the news, whatever's making the news, what people may be talking about at the water cooler, or what I want them to talk about at the water cooler. And I have a philosophy on radio: sacred cows make good hamburgers, so they're better that way. So if we don't back away, we pull no punches.
When you get super controversial, which is only controversial to one half usually,
Yeah.
But when you get controversial, do you read the other stuff? I mean, do you try and reason in your mind how they could come up with the conclusions that they come up with? Or he's like, no.
Yeah, that's why I go to therapy, because I short circuit my mind and go, because I'm right.
Of course you are.
I'm on the right side, so I don't have to think too much. I mean, I like personal freedom, personal liberty, and they're wrong. So anything other than that, why discuss it?
Do you typically follow the current whatever's rolling in the news that week or whatever? Is that
Usually,
what you typically do?
it can vary. I mean, there's times that if I'm bored with politics, I'll talk about an experience. This morning, I talked about walking out of a drugstore and they were soliciting money for teen suicide. And it just bothered me that we live in a state now where teen suicide leads the nation. And I kind of talked about that, tied that into an education story, which wasn't front page news, but it was just my experience walking out of a Walgreens yesterday.
Yeah, I do that too. Like I'll hear something like that and it really triggers a thought process with me, and I'm like, oh my goodness, because I mean we've done shows on teen suicide and same thing. You know, it happened to somebody I knew. I'm like, man, we got to run that story so people can really hear this and at least get a different perspective. What's your drive? What's your mission?
Make money. No. Radio in this day and age, it's not that way. Used to be in the big days.
Yeah.
Used to be. You know, if I can make a difference, persuade a few people, raise my son right, make a difference. This is kind of where you were going earlier.
This is my show. You got to hold on.
Oh, okay.
I don't come to your studio and tell the
Because I didn't invite you. I wasn't there.
You don't go there yet.
Okay.
I
I was setting you up, man.
All right, let's do that. Let's
No, let's
transition.
not.
Let's not.
Let's
No,
talk
let's
about
keep
something
going. All right, let's keep going. So, one of the things about being a talk show host, you get a lot of exposure, and I want to know kind of how you parlayed that into the show that you did. How did that all happen?
The television show?
Yeah.
The executive producer of Frontier Taste and Tales was my first. I was doing music radio, and a guy across town. I moved to Denver. A station moved in. I literally have been in radio 6 weeks, and I filled in Dallas. And then 2 weeks later, I got a phone call. You want your own morning show in Denver? I mean, it was just a snowball fast track. I literally have been 6 weeks in radio. I'm like, Denver. I never thought of moving to Denver, and I got my own morning show, music show in Denver, and so I was the morning DJ. And the guy across town for about 2 years called me up from a talk station that I actually listened to because I like talk radio and said, have you ever done talk radio? And I said, nope. He goes, well, you talk too much for music radio. That's for darn sure. And that was true. I always got in trouble because I'm like, are we supposed to play a song? I scratch the tunes. I have a few things to say. So that was my music career. And he brought me on to the staff of that talk station. And all of a sudden, I am a 27, 28-year-old kid, spiky Billy Idol hair, piercings, and I'm doing conservative talk radio and morning drive in Denver. And I'd show up to an event, and the little old ladies, the little blue hairs that love me, they love me. Hello, all my blue-haired fans. They love me. They would show up, where's Jimmy? And it would be me. They're like, oh, my God, it's my grandson. They had no clue that I didn't fit the demographic because it was my voice.
Yeah.
And so I did talk radio. That was my producer, or not my producer, my program director, and he moved away to Hawaii, and I lost track of him. And a handful of years right before 2019, got a message on Facebook, hey, Jimmy, it's Jim. And he said, I'm back from the dead, meaning, I'm resurrected. And he said, I have an idea I want to run it by you. And no joke, here's how he came up with the idea, connected 20 years later, that now we're going to do a television show that he's producing, supposed to be a pilot for one of the big Food Network type shows. Not necessarily, I don't want to infringe on a trademark, but you know what I'm saying. Right. One of those big networks. Right. It was a pilot for them that we were presenting to them. And I said, how did you even remember me? He said, I had a host picked out for the show. And that host said, never mind, I'm not going to do it for a variety of reasons. And he says, we were in panic because we had the film crew coming together to film. They were like going to film the next week. He said, we have the film crew ready to go. And I said, well, what made you think of me? He says, 20 years ago, after I left the radio station, so-and-so gave me one of your bobbleheads because I had my own bobblehead. And they gave me one of your bobbleheads, and I was thinking, oh, God, I don't have a host for the show. And he says, I look up, and no joke, your bobblehead was going. And I'm on a teleconference call, and everybody said, do you have a host? We film in like a week and a half. He goes, I think I know a guy. And he called me up out of the blue. Within 5-6 days, I was headed to film, and we filmed the pilot and filmed a full season, and they still like me.
Oh, man, that's awesome. You know, everybody, that's what's cool about everybody on this planet. Like, everybody's got a story. But then there's just certain people that have these real flavorful stories, and it almost seems like you kind of draw that in, right? I want to transition then right now because it's a flavorful story. Let's go, because this is I didn't see that one coming. Tell us about your son.
Where do you want to start?
I want to start from the top. I've read it all, but I want the listeners to hear it from your voice.
All right. I'm doing radio, minding my own merry little business, and I get asked by the church that I'm attending at the time if I wanted to be a chaperone on a college group mission trip. And I said, sure, I'll do that. And we had always talked about adopting a child overseas and never had, and so I just decided, let's figure it out. And through a course of event and connections in Rwanda, where we were leading this trip to, saw a photo of a little boy and immediately said, that's him. He was the only kid of all the photos they sent that was not staring at the camera, going like this, smiling. He was crying. I thought he had a bum leg. It's the way he was standing, finger in his mouth. I went, that's my son. and went over there, led the mission trip, or helped lead the mission trip, and thought going to get to bring the kiddo home. Needed one signature, because it was a private adoption. They don't recognize agencies in Rwanda. So having to work it out all by myself, and needed one signature. Couldn't get it. Came back without my son, kept working it. Everybody thought I was crazy. And I'd said, you know what, even if I don't get the kiddo, I'm going to get him, I will get him, but I still got to take care of all the rest of the kids. I said, I don't ever want my son to be in my arms looking at a photo and go, Daddy, what happened to those other kids? Because a lot of people, and I don't fault or judge, they adopt internationally, and it's like, get the heck out of Dodge and move on. And I didn't want him to go, what happened to those kids? And me say, I don't know. I wanted to say, well, that kid's here, that kid's here. And so I started raising a few funds for those kids. And I called it my orphan project, is what I called it. And someone said, you got to be a better brander than that. And I said, well, he's not even here. And I said, well, I'm going to go back. And I said, I'm making a promise to my son. They said, Rivers Promise, and that's his name. Okay, so it started my organization, Rivers Promise. Went back to Rwanda about a year and 2 months later from their first trip. And I said, I'm just going to stay here until I either walk out of here with the kid, or I'm going to have to go through some paperwork to undo everything I had done there, because he was adopted. I just couldn't leave the country. It was a crazy mess. So I went over there and got the paper signed and came home. There's a bunch of stories in between on that 2-week trip, but it was a 2-week trip turned into about 3 or 4 week trip.
Did you get to see him the first time you were there?
First time I was there, I held him.
And
He had no clue.
no clue.
No one even in the orphanage knew. The bishop that oversaw that church, most of the orphanages there were part of churches. And so the bishop that oversaw the church, well above the local staff, he was the bishop over the area, he knew. He was our only contact, because they didn't want him to know or other children to know, because it would cause jealousy and things like that. So he had no clue until the day I walked in with the signature and carried him out of the orphanage.
What do you recall about him? When you get him home, how was that transition for him?
It was fantastic, actually. He was quiet, and I'm not.
You don't say.
I'm not. He's very quiet. He's very sweet little kid. But I remember one of the most meaningful parts of the transition. So here I am, being dad, and I don't know if he understands me. We leave Rwanda and have to stop in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, to process some more paperwork at a U.S. embassy, a central U.S. embassy. So we go to Addis Ababa. He and I are in a hotel, the Hilton Hotel in Addis Ababa. Goats being herded down the street. It was totally different than Rwanda. And he doesn't understand a word that I say, and I don't understand a word he says. I have a sheet of paper that's phonetics of, if he looked at me and said, Kwituma, that meant, I have to poop. And he'd say that, and I'm like, oh, okay, I gotcha. If he would ever look at me and say, Kunyata, that means I gotta pee. If I told him Ichata, that meant sat down. If I said Dagakunda, that meant I love you. That's how we communicate. And I would look it up. I'd hear him say something. I'm like, and occasionally he'd say something, does not compute. I have no clue, kid, try again. And I'd just go through the list. Kunyata, Kuituma, Ichata. I mean, I just tried to pick it.
And it's just you and him.
Just me and him. I think. And he had been taught where the Addis Ababa Hilton, never forget it, in Ethiopia, and there was a big swimming pool. And I think he had been taught in the orphanage, had taught them, don't go near the water. The little kids, stay away from the little lake, the little pond there. Don't go, you'll drown. So when I got him there, we're walking the grounds, it's kind of a, park kind of through the hotel property, and he stops, freezes. And I have his hand, and he won't move. He's dragging his heels. He can't go by the swimming pool. He had never seen a swimming pool in his life. He just thought that's the water, and I'm not supposed to go by it. So I finally, I don't know what, got him to go past the water. I took him to the little playground. Every kid in America knows what a playground is. He didn't know. I do what? I climbed it. I mean, it's just the things that even in Ethiopia that he saw were different. But the language barrier was the most interesting, because somehow we made it. We made it to America. And one day, he'd been here about a week or two. And the first thing I did, went to Toys R Us to try to find toys that spoke English. I figured out, pull the thing, horse. I guess a bad horse noise, or move.
It was a bad horse.
We're working on that. Can we overdub that and put in a real horse noise there? So I just tried to find him toys that spoke English to him. And I
Yeah.
think that's a good way to learn. So, and I also, he had not really seen television ever, and so he's fascinated. So I put it on PBS, and dear Lord, we watched Barney, we watched Backyardigans, all these shows that were on at the time, and they were great ways for him to learn. So one day, he's in the back seat of my car. I'm going to my post office box, and I'm trying to kind of keep him awake so I don't have to carry him up for his nap. And I start kind of singing to him, and I sing the Barney song, and I say, I love River. And no joke, he stopped and he goes, I love Daddy. I lost it. He heard me. He understands me. It was. I had to pull over. I was a wreck. I'm like, oh. It took a couple of weeks, and he sang right back to me. And at that point, I said, now he understands me. So now, no more excuses, son. So
Just this isn't even for the guests. This is just for me. Like, was there any moment that I'm sitting there trying to picture myself as an orphan. This guy who's a different color than me, big guy, right? You're a little kid. Was there any hesitation?
No, they all knew me because I had been to the orphanage so often, and they all knew me. So when I would come down the trail, and I was there for 2 weeks before I ever left with him, and I'd come down the trail and I had photos. The kids, we called it Guantanamo because the kids were like a prison. They'd stand at the chain link fence, and they would see me, and I was later, once they knew I had adopted, my nickname is Papa Kazungu. If you go to Africa and you're a Mzungu, that means you're a white guy.
Yeah.
And a white guy means anything that's not black, not African. So if you're Asian, you're a Mzungu. Everybody's a Mzungu if you're not African.
Right.
And so my son's nickname at the orphanage was Kazungu, which means almost white and almost black. And I said, how did he get that name? And they said, once you came to adopt him, we realized, oh, that's who he was talking about. And no joke, he would tell the mama at the orphanage, she would say, River, he's 3. The boys take your ball. We only have one ball. You don't fight. The other boys fight. Even at 3, he had no clue. He would say, one day my daddy will come for me. A man will come. I will go. I will. They're like, we called him Kazungu because he didn't fight like he was desperate. And they said, we always think he thinks he will be rich one day and have many balls. He's totally different than the rest of the kids. And so I would come down the sidewalk, and they'd all stand at the Guantanamo fence, the chain link, and they would see me. We're kind of the bottom of a hill. My driver would let me off at the top of the hill, and here I'd come trucking down with my little white hat on, and I'd come trying not to slide down the hill in my shoes, and all the kids would hear me as soon as they did, Papa Kazungu, Papa Kazungu, Papa Kazungu, and they would just riot at the fence and trying to get over there, and I'd come in, and so they all knew me. So when I showed up, I think he was a little shocked. He was 3 and a half.
Yeah.
A little shocked that he was leaving with me, but it wasn't like I was a total stranger. I'd been playing with him, I'd go to the orphanage for weeks while I was there.
What was his conditions like there? I mean, obviously it's Guantanamo, but were they pretty tough conditions?
Not as bad as some, but they were not great. One of the reasons I decided to help was because the kids were dressed, I guess, decently, but no, it wasn't a fashion show, but they were clothed. And I've been to other places in Africa through a charity where literally their kids are naked, or a leaf or something. So they were actually clothed. And I asked there, because again, I was leading a missions trip there, but I was actually scouting out my son. I asked the bishop there and the pastors, I said, what is one need you have here? And I thought they were going to say food. And I thought I was going to run up the hill, buy a bag of rice and beans, get them a couple of chickens and be done with it. And they looked and didn't even hesitate. And this is what started my mission to start River's Promise. They said education. And I said, education. I said, that's your biggest need. He says, look at them. They have decent clothes. He says, we feed them, not enough, but they're not starving. He said, but they will never break the bond of poverty without education. I can't send them all to school. Boom, there's my mission. And I said, okay. So I went back, and that's when I started Jimmy's Orphan Fund, his children's fund, and decided I would make sure that all those kids at the orphanage, after I got my son, had the opportunity to go to school. And that's how it all started.
Man, what a great story. Like, yeah, if people just look you up on the talk radio, it's not what you expect.
Yeah, you should have seen it when I ran for Congress. And in Congress, when you run for Congress, you get they call you a few names. And if they're not true, they try to make them true.
Right.
And one of the things that whether you're on this side or this side, they like to call you, oh, he's a racist. He's a big. Then they'd see the family photo and go, well, maybe, how does that work?
What else can we get him on?
And one time I had this thing I'd said on the radio, and they were trying to come after me, and my producer at the time said, Jimmy doesn't have a statement on that because he's in Africa taking care of widows and orphans. That diffused that problem as well. But the cool thing is, all those kids, matter of fact, just this past week, a kid that was at the orphanage, he was older than my son. He was probably 10, which makes him, he's probably in his 20s now. A couple of months ago, he found me on social media, middle of Africa, remembered my name because he was probably 10 at the time, remembered my name, found me on social media, told me his story. I remembered him, and I knew exactly who he was. He was having a tough time because he never had a biological family, never kind of an adoptive family that took care of him because we helped close the orphanage. He was kind of wandering around homeless, and I said, what do you need? And he told me what he wanted, and I sent $100 and sent him to driving school. He finished his driving test, so that he had a job as a driver. So it's been 10, 12 years since I first met that kid, and I still send him to school. And with COVID, they just had another shutdown in Rwanda. Okay. And he messaged me, and it's really sad, and they speak broken English. He put emojis of a kid crying, and this is a 22-year-old strapping, young, good-looking African guy, and they always call me Daddy. I don't know if they know the abbreviation, but it's very little boyish, but it's Daddy. I'm so hungry. Can you help me? He had no food. So I rushed off and called my guys and said, check it out, because I have a team over there that works with us, and I said, see what the need is, and they said, yeah, he's in a bad situation. We sent $50, changed his life, and he's sent me every day, thank you again, thank you, I'm eating again. Yeah. He's just he got a job, they wouldn't let him work, and there's no social safety net. So I've known that kid since he was 8 years old, 9 years old, and we're still helping him when he needs it.
Here's what I want to know. River is in this situation. He comes over here. Was it just like, oh my God? Did you fly into New York by chance when you were coming back?
I left Rwanda, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. I remember it. And then the last minute, I have to add a kid onto my reservation. And until you hit America, he's traveling under a Rwandan passport. So they couldn't even say his name, his Rwandan pronunciations of the name. I had the Americanized. Overnight, couldn't speak each other's language. We leave Addis Ababa, land in Rome for a fuel up, but we can't even get off the plane, and he can't speak English, and I can't. We land in Rome, and we don't understand the flight attendants. No one. We were the blind leading the blind in Rome, and then we went Rome to Washington Dulles, and landed at Washington Dulles, and I finally. First stop, I needed to get some food in him besides airline food because that was not his native taste buds.
Yeah.
So I found a banana at a Starbucks, and I got him a banana, and at that time we had a house in the Bay Area in California. So from Washington Dulles, flew across to San Francisco. Funny story, at the airport, the flight is delayed leaving Washington Dulles across the continent to go to San Francisco. He's bored. He's now been on a plane way too long. We don't speak. I bought him at the gift shop in Ethiopia a knockoff John Deere tractor to play with because I didn't travel with toys. I wasn't prepared. So I found a knockoff toy in Ethiopia. He's playing with it and doing that thing. And he's on the floor. You know, because we booked the flight last minute, we're in the very back of the plane. And I'm just trying to keep him happy and not have a meltdown myself. And he's on the floor in the back of the next row to the back. And he's down the floor, and I know people judge me. The floor is dirty. Get it. Understand that. But the one flight attendant comes by, and she goes, sir, that floor is really nasty. I wouldn't let him down there. And I went, thank you. And then the next flight attendant came and said, sir, just judging the situation, I'm guessing that floor is maybe clean from where? And I said, ma'am, he's played him far worse than this, and he has an immune system. That's right. And so he played his truck, and we flew across, had a banana.
You weren't trying to plug anything, were you?
Well, you know.
Always a motive, baby. I love it.
The immune system. Our next segment is about the immune system.
Vaccinate or don't vaccinate. We do have an immune system here.
Hello.
So tell me, you get him home, right? And cultural shock has to be.
You know, he was so young, I don't think it was.
Just went with the flow.
He just went with the flow. And he doesn't have any memories of this. He was 3.5, so he doesn't remember. We lived in a nice area in San Francisco, and downstairs the next day, and this is probably going to get cut out, probably should be. Downstairs the next day, there was a car show on the street that we lived on. And the car show, it was Lamborghinis and Ferraris, and there was an armed guard in front of a Gucci store. I mean, I'm like, dear goodness, thank God he doesn't remember this, because then he would have to go to therapy. But he had walked through the parking lot, the gated parking lot, and all he didn't know brand names of cars. He didn't care. He just knew they were cars. And the culture shock for him was he had walked by all the cars, and some of them were nice. Don't touch them. Don't touch them. Yeah. Don't touch them. Daddy gonna have to wash dishes again. He wants to touch them, and he's going, moto car, moto car, moto car, moto car. Every car he had to point at it and go, moto car, moto car, moto car, moto car. We never could get through a parking lot. It took us forever. It took a few days for him to not want to finally got him to not touch it. Yes,
not that real fancy one. Don't touch that one.
No, dude, don't do that. And BB is no. BB. 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 And I'd say, BB, don't touch it.
Does he hold on to any of the language?
No, I wish he did. Save me money on interpreters when I go over there.
I think that would be interesting for you to learn that one. You know,
I know enough to be dangerous. I call it street Rwandan.
Yeah.
You know, I know how to ask where the toilet's at. You say,
right.
Toilet, and they go.
That's the universal language.
Yeah, and I can tell total strangers I love them. Dakakunda. Sometimes it's frowned upon. Thus, those restraining orders we were talking about earlier.
Man, those are tough sometimes, man.
I can tell people I have to poop too. I mean, I can walk down. Kuituma. I do that. I can speak a little bit.
So, where do you go now? I mean, he's a grown man. This kid is stacked.
Yeah, 16, going on 17, and 18, 19, 20.
Yeah.
Gets his driver's license next week. Oh dear God.
Now, has he ever been back?
He's been back 2 or 3 times with me.
Well, and tell me what he thinks about that.
His first time back was about 3rd grade, 4th grade, and I said, we're going to go back, but you're going to give back when you go. And I said, what do you want to do? He loved shoes, always loved shoes. And so he said, I'm going to give shoes away. So, okay, so he helped raise the money, and I helped him as well. And he raised the money to buy 100 pairs of shoes. And we went to a new village where his orphanage, we found a lot of people at the orphanage, but we had moved the orphanage away, and the kids had gone to mostly adoptive homes. So we're in a new area he had never been to. I said, these people desperately need shoes. These are where kids are naked, and then we get them clothes, but they still don't have shoes. And so we gave away 100 pairs of shoes. That he pretty much raised the money for. But the cool thing on that trip, he just wanted to see, Dad, show me where I was, he's 3rd grade, show me where I was found. And I think that's what's so important as an adoptive parent, not as a guy that is a humanitarian and does all this. It was interesting to see, because I know when I take him back to Texas, I say, son, that's where I went to elementary school.
Right.
That's where I went to middle school. And I know he's going, I don't really care, but I care. And I realized on that trip it was very important for him to have roots.
Yeah.
And for him he kept saying, Dad, make sure, I want to see where I was found at. And he'd ask. And I'd take him there, and I have a photo. He posed for a photo. He was found in a ditch in a rainstorm at 11 o'clock at night with barely any clothes on. They thought he was going to die. The scab of the umbilical cord was still there. Just found abandoned in front of a woman's house. He wanted to see that spot, and he saw it. He wanted to see the orphanage. He saw it. He wanted to reenact some of the early photos of him and I before he knew I was his dad.
Yeah.
He wanted to reenact those photos. That was just his. He wanted to have roots, and I realized how important that was for.
Oh, what a hell of a story.
Yeah.
What's his process now? I mean, does he feel like this is some big part of his calling in his heart as well?
He's so proud of his story. Even as a kid, we were back here in Colorado, and he saw a moving truck at a block over. And he said, Daddy, I think there's a little boy that'll live there. And he was probably 3rd grade. And I said, oh, cool. He goes, I'm going to go see him. And the moving truck was still there. And my son went and knocked on the door. And the family tells the story. They said, he was so cute. This little boy says, hello, my name is River, and I live next door. I live across wherever I live. And he says, I think there's a little boy that lives here. And they said, yes, there is. He's unpacking his room. What is your name? My name's River. He said, come in. We'll get him. And he goes, they tell us about yourself. He goes, I have a website. It's riverspromise.org. It tells you everything you want to know about me. One day I walked into a school in about 4th or 5th grade, and the counselor there she said, Mr. Lakey, love talking to River. I'm like, she goes, oh, we talk almost every day. I'm like, oh my Lord, I missed something. I should have had him in therapy, not me. I don't know. And she goes, no, it's great. She says he's kind of figured out he can get out of class that says he has to go talk to the counselor.
He's already learned the
He's
system.
working the system.
He's working
and I said,
the
well, what does he
system.
talk about? Is everything okay? She goes, no, it's great. He tells me about Africa. He says he's raising money for shoes and that I need to go to his website, riverspromise.org, and give some money for shoes. So he knows the story. He owns the story. Our house is covered with photos of him in the orphanage. And
What an amazing story. Like, it was when I first got introduced to you, I'm like, all right, yeah, this guy's a conservative host. This is pretty cool. Guy knows a lot of famous people. It's pretty cool. I hear this story, and this is what warms my heart. This is the stuff that I think means everything. I mean, you can be on TV, have all the money in the world, but if you don't have somebody close to you that you love, what's the point in all of it, right?
And if you don't leave the world a better place, I mean, you can know all the famous people. I mean, I talk every day, 4 hours a day, television show. If we're cooking in the kitchen for the television show, making a chicken fried steak's not really going to change anybody's life or whatever. Meeting the blue-haired lady at the radio thing, I might make a small dent, persuade somebody to start thinking politically right, but literally we save lives in Africa. I mean, I don't get to do as much as I want, but, talking and blabbing on the radio as much as our egos would like to think we're really changing the dynamic. No, generally we're preaching to the choir and ticking some other people off, and that's it. It's not like it's a Billy Graham crusade. So I see that hand at the end of the radio show. How many of you converted today? It doesn't happen that way. There's not an altar call at the end of it. It's just somebody's mad, somebody's happy, somebody loves me, somebody hates me. We go on the television show, we cook in the kitchen, we go on a trip. Okay, people are entertained, but...
Well, here's the deal, because I caught on. You've said Rivers Promise like 40 times. It's really good.
And immune system.
You did. You plugged that really well. But I need you to go a little further. Tell me everything about Rivers Promise. Can people go on to this? It's their way of also making a huge difference.
We're 501c3, fully tax deductible. There's a couple of things people can do. We're building a school now. 1,500 seat campus in the next 5 years is our goal. COVID has slowed us down a little bit. We're going to one of the poorest parts of Rwanda, building a school that'll be state of the art. Every government in the area is begging us, please bring your school here. I said, no, we're going to where the kids were naked and had no school. That's where we're building ours. They're amazed. They're like, oh, no one does that. I'm like, I know, but we're going to do it that way. People can give towards our school. People can actually sponsor a child. You can just look, there's kids that don't go to school. We're really bad. Sometimes they lose a sponsor and we keep them in there out of the general fund. I can't take the kid out of school. Right. The board is going, Jimmy, it doesn't work. I'm saying, it doesn't matter if it works. We're nonprofit and definitely are nonprofit. So, but there's ways to do. Riverspromise.org is the website. There's sponsorship. There's golf tournament. There's events and stuff. Or I could even come speak to somebody's group and tell the story.
Yeah, I want to do that. I want to really promote this. This is such a great heartwarming story. Can people adopt through there?
No. Rwanda is still kind of strange. Rwanda changed their rules, and a goal was to get I had a couple of other kids that I really had my eye on. They were my babies. I still take care of them over there. But Rwanda changed all the rules. River was almost like a miracle. He's the last kid that was approved. Not the last kid that got out, but got that signature that was so hard to get before they shut down the system and said, we're going to agencies. And so it's taken almost a decade for them to kind of get. And so I think they're getting their adoption program going, and there's some agencies now that are mentioning Rwanda, but I don't know if they're really up and going yet. They shut it down for a while.
That's like that divine intervention, man. It's what makes this story amazing, because I read that all in the article. How much money does it take to really help these kids?
We send a kid to school $35 a month. $35 a month, that pays their tuition, that pays their school fees, that gives them a school uniform, and that also, every month we give what we call basic amenities. It may be bars of soap, it may be a bag of rice and beans. So $35 a month is kind of where we've been there forever. And we look at it every year and say, let's bump it to 40 because we eat a little bit on it, but it's still, I'm like, no, let's keep 35 because it's a focal point. $35 a month does that, which totals $420 a year to sponsor a kid. And we've got other things we do. You can build a house for a widow. We built houses. Well, we found out that a lot of the kids were homeless in this area. They're orphaned, or their moms were homeless. And I'm like, where do they live? And literally they took me to a stack of banana leaves. And I said, that's where they live. Under banana leaves, yeah. And then I went to one guy's house, and I said, where's your house this time? Because they took me to his house. It was a hut. Literally, it was just a hut. And they said it's at the bottom of the hill. Every time they get monsoons, it washes their mud huts away. So they're constantly either rebuilding or homeless. So they just sleep under banana leaves. Most of the kids in that area used to die before the age of 3. But when we came in, we totally changed it by buying them blankets and building houses. So we would found a widow or a mom, the only 1 or 2 children of those widowed, and some of them were old, some were young, and we'd build them a house, a 4-room house. Cost us $3,500 to build a house. Nice house, stucco home. They always say, "Oh, I live like a white person now." It's like a mansion to them, and they live there. They always bring kids in to live with them and they raise them as a family unit, and we can build a house for $3,500. Metal roof. Occasionally, after a few years, about a decade later, I said, "Don't we have a warranty on that roof?" I had to replace the metal roof. That wasn't in the budget. I'm like, okay, there is a lifespan.
Probably not a lot of warranty work
over there.
Although they're probably calling them still, being like, "Hey, have your warranty on your car expired?"
Yeah. I got that call over there. "Hey, Mr. Papa Kazungu, your warranty has expired on your hut."
Well, I tell you what. People can accuse you of being conservative. Probably, I'm sure asses come up time, but they can't say you don't have a heart. What an amazing, amazing story. I don't like to infringe on anything, but I would love to run River on a story.
Yeah.
I just think it's amazing, and
he's much more mellow than me. He'd be like,
well, he's young. You know, we all have that teenage kid, right?
Yeah, the teenage kid.
You got to break through some way, but. Oh man, this was wildly entertaining for me, and I knew it was gonna be. Producer Chad talked you up, a lot of other people talked you up. I appreciate you coming on our show, and I hope people look at this River's Promise and donate. I know I'm going to.
It's kind of cool. Anybody, if somebody wants to go with us, we can't adopt really. We don't facilitate that or even know the connections anymore. But once or twice, once we're through this travel restrictions, we take groups over there, and I guarantee you, it will rock your freaking world. It will blow your mind. First of all, Rwanda is the most safest place on the continent of Africa now, even though there was a genocide there years ago.
Yeah.
Safe, walk the streets, great food, wonderful place, beautiful people, and we lead tours over there if somebody ever wants to go along.
And you know what? What a great perspective. I think Americans need a different perspective.
Mm-hmm.
We're pretty spoiled, pretty rotten here. We need a perspective.
You want to get your teenager right? Take him over there.
Yeah, right? I mean, really, it ought to be a mandatory trip,
Yeah,
right? I always say military and probably a mandatory trip like that.
Yeah.
But again, thank you for coming on my show. I look forward to being on your show next week.
Thank you.
And
we're going to talk immune systems.
That's right. And we'll talk immune systems. Thank you once again for coming on my show.
Thank you.
You bet.